Welcome to Bloodbath and Beyond. Today we review The Sleeper. If I die before I wake... ...
Written and directed by Justin Russell, starring Brittany Belland, Paul Moon, Jason Crabtree, and Jessica Cameron. This movie takes place in 1981, where there's a serial killer stalking sorority girls at the Theta house. They get some lewd calls before they're attacked by a hammer-wielding maniac. This was actually a request from our top donator, Deke, over on Patreon. This is the 7th movie request from him, and he's actually given us movies that we've never heard of before. I didn't know about this one. And it's a slasher, there's nudity, and there's lots of gore. Thank you, Deke. So what do we like?
I actually really liked the gore in this film. I appreciated what we saw. It was a lot of aftermath gore. There was like eye gouging and like necks being slit open. And they actually had some surprise kills. Like not like surprise victims, but the on-screen impact actually caught me off guard.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I really liked the atmosphere. It seemed like it belonged in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s. From like the little aesthetics and the grain that they had to the music and the way that they used lighting and the shot choices and stuff. Everything really seemed like it was an early slasher.
We had some really good sorority sisters and a house mother. I appreciate the idea of the house mother. I don't get what a house mother actually does. She doesn't do anything special, but it's fun to talk about her while you're watching the movie.
Yeah, you're always curious, like, what she's up to. Is she an alcoholic? Well, because this draws similarities to other movies we'll get into later on. But yeah, we had an attractive cast, which is always enjoyable. As weird as it sounds, we like seeing good-looking women get murdered. And having a young Jessica Cameron in this is kind of interesting, because we had no idea. Like, when we put on the movie, we saw her name in the opening credits. It said Jessica Cameron, we're like, what? I've never heard of her in this, and I just had no idea.
Besides looking nice, all the girls did a good job acting. Brittany Belland, who is our lead, Amy, in this film, I really enjoyed her character because she was like the innocent one who was just getting introduced into the sorority house. And I gotta say, best dancer on the dance floor in that dance sequence.
I disagree. We know who the real star is.
But no sorority film is complete without a great male lead. And that's in Bobby. I don't know what it was about him, but I liked him. I think it was because I felt bad for him. Throughout the whole film, everyone was just putting the blame on Bobby.
Bobby, I need to tell you something before I get Cindy. The prank calls you've been making to this house have got to stop.
He didn't do anything wrong. He was just a nice guy. He just loved his girlfriend and was very concerned when she went missing.
Yeah, I have no idea why everybody placed the blame on him. Like, every time they would get a prank phone call, they'd be like, oh, Bobby. Or they'd hear a noise in the background. It's like, oh, it's probably Bobby up to something. He never seemed like he was a prankster. He was just a nice dude. And maybe his buddy, Derek, he would have been causing some shit, but Bobby was a decent fellow.
Yeah, Derek was the guy who I thought was going to be the dick.
Now let's move on to our dislikes. I didn't really like Detective Drake, who was supposed to be our Abraham.
Yeah, I talked to a Detective Drake earlier.
I'm Drake.
He was just goofy and weird. Like, every time he, like, was investigating, he'd just, like, look around all weird. He was wearing some stupid hat. Like, you go to the store and you're like, what would a detective wear? Ooh, this looks fitting. And definitely didn't look like a detective.
But he did have some really stunning eyebrows. I have to admit, it was the one feature that stood out, which helped animate his face. But that kind of takes away from his character.
It almost seemed like he was a parody of what a detective would be. And that kind of brings me to the next point. This is an 80s style slasher, but it's not a parody.
It's trying to be an homage to different styles of slashers, in particular, Black Christmas. This film is very evident that it's just trying to be another version of Black Christmas. They didn't fail at it, but I didn't really care to see it. It was just another poor telling of something we've already seen.
They even lifted a lot of shots from Black Christmas. And that brings me to the killer. I was not a fan of the killer, to be honest. He wasn't creepy. He wasn't scary looking. He looked goofy, if anything. Especially when you see him like full body, like running, he's just like lumbering around. He kind of looked like if I was really hammered and it's like the middle of the night and I'm just like running for like a cab or something, like that's what it would look like. Yeah, I wasn't a big fan. He was not threatening and I think he really needed to be. and they spent a lot of time like trying to develop his creepiness while he was looking at photos of the potential victims. It seemed really cringy.
This story is actually filled with a few plot holes, which is kind of distracting. There's a few characters that we don't actually get to see them die, and it's just, you assume they're dead. Throughout this film, you're building this bond between Laura and Ava. And then we establish that Ava is actually dead, but Laura is nowhere to be seen. And the same is with Bobby. When he comes into the sorority house, you don't see him after he enters, and it's just the final showdown between the killer and Amy. So there's a few characters that just disappear with no reason, especially someone like Laura and Bobby, where they are in the majority of this film, and it's kind of building towards something.
They just like build their characters up for an hour and a half, and then they just forget about them, and now it's like, okay, we just need this one girl versus a killer in the house, and that's what we want. And it's like they just completely ignored everything else and they didn't care about it. Specifically Bobby. He was supposed to be like a hero type. They just ended up swapping him for Detective Dickhead, and they let him run it for a while.
I think this film also suffers from a very weak final act. Everything about it was weak, especially the chase scene. I didn't feel the intensity that you were supposed to feel, and just how it all played out. It was very, very dry and fell flat.
I think a lot of this movie was a little dry because it was kind of boring. Like the pacing was a little off. I think like it was intentionally supposed to be, but it didn't really work. A lot of scenes and shots were just held a lot longer than they should have been. I think mainly like in the last act where Amy hides under some chairs in a theater for about 7 minutes. You just have the sleeper just like walking up and down the aisles, like hitting chairs with a hammer. That one scene kind of felt like what the whole movie was. It's just like, you're just waiting, and you're falling asleep, you're dozing off a little bit. The sleeper. Suitable. Now it's time for our final thoughts and ratings. The Sleeper tried to recreate an 80s style movie, and I think they did that fairly well. Unfortunately, they did borrow a little too many elements from Black Christmas, and they also borrowed some of the pacing. I enjoyed most of our characters, and I did like the gore, and they built too many things up to have like no purpose, or like main characters would get killed off screen and you didn't even know. And by the third act, you're gonna start falling asleep because it does kind of drag on a little bit. So I'm gonna give this 1.5 cops here out of 5.
The Sleeper is a snoozer. That is for sure, because the pacing is very slow. And in some cases, you could appreciate slow pacing, but in this film, it didn't suit it. There's a lot of elements in this film that could have been executed better. I enjoyed all of our characters, and I did like the gore that we got. Plus, it had a really good soundtrack, but at the same time, the audio was off where the music was too loud while characters were soft-spoken, so it was hard to hear what they were saying, which in a slow burn movie, you rely on the dialogue. The killer was probably one of the weakest aspects of this film. I didn't really enjoy him. He wasn't menacing. He wasn't a threat, and I didn't feel threatened at all. This probably had one of the weakest third acts I've seen in a film, which is really disappointing because they did a good job building up these characters. They just didn't deliver what I hoped. So with that being said, I'm gonna give this film 1.5 horny howls out of 5.
As always, thank you for watching. Like this video and comment below with your thoughts on the film if you've seen it. If you haven't and you do want to check it out, there are links in the description where you can find it. And if you want the opportunity to recommend a movie for us to review, check out our perks on Patreon, again, in the description. And if this is your first time here, make sure you subscribe to the channel to stay updated with everything Bloodbath and beyond.